Chapter 4. He breakfasted with Deborah late on Sunday morning. He had come down at the usual hour, despite his long tramp of the previous night, for he wanted to tell her the news and talk it all out before Laura came down. Because Deborah, he hadn't a doubt, with her women's curiosity, had probed deep into Laura's affairs in the many long talks they had had in her room. He had often heard them there. And so, as he waited, and still his daughter did not come, Roger grew distinctly annoyed, and when at last she did appear, his greeting was perfunctory. "What kept you out so late last night?" "Oh, I was having a very good time," said Deborah contentedly. She poured herself some coffee. "I've always wanted," she went on, "to see Laura really puzzled, downright flabbergasted, and I saw her just like that last night." Roger looked up with a jerk of his head. "You and Laura together last night?" "Exactly, on the Astor roof." At her father's glare of astonishment, a look of quiet relish came over her mobile features. Her wide lips twitched a little. "Well, why not?" she asked him. "I'm quite a dancer down at school, and last night with Alan Baird, we were dining together, you know, he proposed we go somewhere and dance. He's a perfectly awful dancer, and so I held out as long as I could. But he insisted, and I gave in, though I much prefer the theater." "Well," breathed Roger softly, "so you hoof it with the rest." His expression was startled and intent. Would he ever get to know these girls? "Well," he added with a sigh, "I suppose you know what you're about." "Oh, no, I don't," she answered. "I never know what I'm about. If you always do, you miss so much. You get into a solemn habit of trying nothing till you're sure. But to return to Laura. As we came gaily down the room, we ran right into her, you see. That's how Alan dances. And when we collided, I smiled at her sweetly and said, 'Why, hello, dearie, you here too?'" And Deborah sipped her coffee. I have never believed that the lower jaw of a well-bred girl could actually drop open, but Laura's did. With a good strong light, Alan told me he could have examined her tonsils for her. Rather a disgusting thought. You see, until she saw me there, poor Laura had me so thoroughly placed. My school-marm job, my tastes and habits, everything, all cut and dried. She has never once come to my school, and in every talk we've ever had, there has been some perfectly good and absorbing reason why we should talk about Laura alone." "There is now," said her father. He was in no mood for tomfoolery. His daughter saw it and smiled a little. "What is it?" she inquired, and then he let her have it. "Laura wants to get married," he snapped. Deborah caught her breath at that, and an eager, excited expression swept over her attractive face. She had leaned forward suddenly. "Father, no! Which one?" she asked. "Tell me, is it Harold Sloane?" "It is." "Oh, Dad!" She sank back in her chair. "Oh, Dad!" she repeated. "What's the matter with Sloane?" he demanded. "Oh, nothing, nothing. It's all right." "It is, huh? How do you know it is?" His anxious eyes were still upon hers, and he saw she was thinking fast and hard and shutting him completely out, and it irritated him. "What do you know of this fellow Sloane?" "Oh, nothing, nothing." "Nothing? Then why do you sit there and say it's all right? Don't talk like a fool," he exclaimed. He waited, but she said no more, and Roger's exasperation increased. He has money enough, apparently, and they'll spend it like March hares. Deborah looked up at him. "What did Laura tell you, dear?" "Not very much. I'm only her father. She had a dinner and dance on her mind." But Deborah pressed her questions, and he gave her brief replies. "Well, what shall we do about it?" he asked. "Nothing, until we know something more." Roger regarded her fiercely. "Why don't you go up and talk to her, then?" "She's asleep yet." "Never mind if she is. If she's going to marry a chap like that and ruin her life, it's high time she was up for her breakfast." While he scanned his Sunday paper, he heard Deborah in the pantry. She emerged with a breakfast tray, and he saw her start up to Laura's room. She was there for over an hour, and when she returned to his study, he saw her eyes were shining. How women's eyes will shine at such times, he told himself in annoyance. Well, he demanded. Better leave her alone today, she advised. Harold is coming some night soon. What for? To have a talk with you. Her father smote his paper. What did she tell you about him? He asked. Not much more than she told you. His parents are dead, but he has a rich widowed aunt in Bridgeport who adores him. They mean to be married the end of May. She wants a church wedding, bridesmaids, ushers, the wedding reception here, of course. Oh, Lord, breathed Roger dismally. We won't bother you much, father dear. You will bother me much, he retorted. I propose to be bothered a lot. I'm going to look up this fellow Sloane. But let's leave him alone for today. She bent over her father compassionately. What a night you must have had, poor dear. Roger looked up in grim reproach. You like all this, he grunted. You, a grown woman, a teacher, too. I wonder if I do, she said. I guess I'm a queer person, Dad, a curious family mixture of Laura and Edith and Mother and you, with a good deal of myself thrown in. But it feels rather good to be mixed, don't you think? Let's stay mixed as long as we can, and keep together the family. That afternoon, to distract him, Deborah took her father to a concert in Carnegie Hall. She had often urged him to go of late, but despite his liking for music, Roger had refused before, simply because it was a change. But why balk at going anywhere now when Laura was up to such antics at home? Do you mind climbing up to the gallery? Deborah asked as they entered the hall. Not at all, he curtly answered. He did mind it very much. Then we'll go to the very top, she said. It's a long climb, but I want you to see it. It's so different up there. I don't doubt it, he replied, and as they made the slow ascent, pettishly he wondered why Deborah must always be so eager for queer places. Galleries, zoo schools, tenement slums. Why not take a $2 seat in life? Deborah seated him far down in the front of the great gallery, over at the extreme right, and from here they could look back and up at the huge dim arena of faces. Now, watch them close, she whispered. See what the music does to them. As the symphony began below, the faces all grew motionless, and as the music cast its spell, the anxious, ruffled feelings which had been with Roger all that day, little by little were dispelled, and soon his imagination began to work upon this scene. He saw many familiar American types. He felt he knew what they'd been doing on Sundays only a few years before. After church they had eaten large Sunday dinners. Then some had napped, and some had walked, and some had gone to Sunday school. At night they had had cold suppers, and afterward some had gone back to church, while others, as in Roger's house in the days when Judith was alive, had gathered around the piano for hymns. Young men callers, friends of their daughters, had joined in the family singing. Yes, some of these people had been like that. To them, a few short years ago, a concert on the Sabbath would have seemed a sacrilege. He could almost hear from somewhere the echo of "Abide with me." But over this memory of a song rose now the surging music of Tchaikovsky's Pathetique, and the yearnings and fierce hungers in this tumultuous music swept all the hymns from Roger's mind. Once more he watched the gallery, and this time he became aware that more than half were foreigners. Out of the mass from every side individual faces emerged, swarthy, weird, and staring hungrily into space. And to Roger, the whole shadowy place, the very air, grew pregnant, charged with all these inner lives bound together in this mood, this mystery that had swept over them all, immense and formless, baffling, this furious demanding and this blind, wistful groping which he himself had known so well ever since his wife had died and he had lost his faith in God. What was the meaning of it all if life were nothing but a start and there were nothing but the grave? You will live on in our children's lives. He glanced around at Deborah. Was she so certain, so serene? What do I know of her? He asked. Little or nothing, he sadly replied. And he tried to piece together from things she had told him of her life as it had passed him by. Had there been no questionings, no sharp disillusionments? There must have been. He recalled irritabilities, small acts and exclamations of impatience, boredom, blues, and as he watched her he grew sure that his daughter's existence had been like his own. Despite its different setting, its other aims and visions, it had been a mere beginning, a feeling for a foothold, a search for light and happiness, and Deborah seemed to him still a child. How far will you go? He wondered. Although he was still watching her even after the music had ceased, she did not notice him for a time. Then she turned to him slowly with a smile. Well, what did you see? She asked. I wasn't looking, he replied. Why, dearie, she retorted, where's that imagination of yours? It was with you, he answered. Tell me what you were thinking. And still under the spell of music, Deborah said to her father, I was thinking of hungry people, millions of them now, this minute, not only here, but in so many places. Concerts, movies, libraries. Hungry, oh, for everything. Life, its beauty, all it means. And I was thinking this is youth, no matter how old they happen to be, and that to feed it we have schools. I was thinking how little we've done as yet, and of all that we're so sure to do in the many, many years ahead. Do you see what I mean? She squeezed his hand. Welcome back to school, she said, back into the hungry army of youth. Shh. Again the music had begun, and sitting by her side he wondered whether it was because she knew that Laura's affair had made him feel old that Deborah had brought him here. They went to Edith's for supper. The Cunninghams' apartment was on the west side, well uptown. It was not the neighborhood which Edith would have chosen, for nearly all the nice people she knew lived east of the park. But rents were somewhat lower here, and there was at least an abundance of fresh air for her family. Edith had found that her days were full of these perplexing decisions. It was all very simple to resolve that her children be old-fashioned, normal, wholesome, nice. But then she looked into the city, into schools and kindergartens, clothes and friends and children's parties, books and plays, and through them all, to her dismay, she felt conflicting currents, clashes between old and new. She felt New York, and anxiously she asked herself, what is old-fashioned? What is normal? What is wholesome? What is nice? Cautiously she made her way, testing and comparing, trying small experiments. Often sharply she would draw in her horns. She had struck something common, and she knew all this was nothing compared to the puzzles that lay ahead. For from her friend Madge Deering, whose girls were well along in their teens, she heard of deeper problems. The girls were so inquisitive. Dauntlessly Madge was facing each month the most disturbing questions. Thank heaven Edith only had one daughter. Sons were not quite so baffling. So she had groped her way along. When her father and Deborah arrived, placidly she asked them what they had been doing, and when she heard that they had been at a concert on the Sabbath, though this was far from old-fashioned and something she would not have done herself, it did not bother her half as much as the fact that Hannah, the Irish nurse, had slapped little Tad that afternoon. She had never known Hannah to do it before. Could it be that the girl was tired or sick? Perhaps she needed a few days off. I must have a talk with her, Edith thought, as soon as father and Deborah go. Roger always liked to come here. Say what you would about Edith's habit of keeping too closely to her home, the children to whom she had devoted herself were a fine, clean, happy lot. Here were new lives in his family, glorious, fresh beginnings. He sat on the floor with her three boys, watching the patient efforts of George to harness his perturbed white rat to Tad's small fire engine. George was a lank, sprawling lad of 14, all legs and arms and elbows, with rumpled hair and freckled face, a quick, bright smile, and nice brown eyes. Frank, simple, understandable eyes. All but one of Edith's children were boys, and boys were a blessed relief to a man who had three grown up daughters. And while Roger watched them, with a gentle glow of anticipation, he waited for what should follow, when, as had been already arranged, Deborah should break to her sister the news of Laura's engagement. And he was not disappointed. The change in Edith was something tremendous. Until now, so quietly self absorbed, at the news that Laura was to be married, instantly she was all alert. Sitting there in the midst of her children and facing a time of agony only a few weeks ahead, which would add one more to her family, Edith's pretty, florid face grew flushed and radiant as she exclaimed, "What a perfectly wonderful thing for Laura! Now, if only she can have a child!" Her questions followed thick and fast, and with them her thoughts of what should be done. Bruce must look up this suitor at once. Bruce demurred stoutly, but without avail. She eagerly questioned her sister as to Laura's plans for the wedding, but plainly she considered that Deborah was no woman to give her the full information she wanted. She must see Laura herself at once. For though she had thoroughly disapproved of the gay, helter-skelter existence of her youngest sister, still Laura was now to be married, and this made all the difference. Just before Roger and Deborah left, Edith drew her father aside, and with a curious concern and pity in her voice, she said, "I'm so sorry I shan't be able to help you with the wedding, dear, and make it the sweet old-fashioned kind that Mother would have wanted. Of course, there's Deborah, she'll be there, but her head is so full of new ideas. I'm afraid she may find the house rather a burden after Laura has gone away." Edith gave a worried little sigh. "I'll be so glad," she added, "when we can get that place in Morristown. We'll want you out there often, and for good long visits, too. You may even find you'll care to try staying there with us for a while." Roger scowled and thanked her. She had given him a shock of alarm. "So she thinks that Deborah will find the housekeeping too hard," he reflected anxiously. And as he walked home with his daughter he kept glancing at her face, which for all its look of quiet had so much tensity beneath. She had packed her life so full of school. What if she wanted to give up their home? She'll try, of course, she'll try her best, but she'll find it too much of an added strain. And again he felt that sickening dread. Deborah said nothing. He felt as though they had drifted apart. And at night in his bed, as Roger stared up at the beetling cliff of apartment windows just outside, drearily he asked himself how it would feel to live like that. Chapter 5. One afternoon, a few days later, Roger was riding in the park. He rode William, a large, lazy cob, who, as he advanced in age, had so subtly and insidiously slackened his pace from a trot to a jog that Roger barely noticed how slowly he was riding. As he rode along, he liked to watch the broad, winding bridle path with its bobbing procession of riders that kept appearing before him under the tall, spreading trees. Though he knew scarcely anyone by name, he was a familiar figure here, and he recognized scores of faces. To many men he nodded at passing, and to not a few alluring young dames, ardent creatures with bright eyes who gave him smiles of greeting, Roger gravely raised his hat. One was the Silver Lady in a Broadway musical show, but he thought she was one of the Newport crowd. He liked to make shrewd guesses like that. There were so many kinds of people here. There were stout, anxious ladies writing for figures, and lean, morose gentlemen writing for health. There were joyous, carefree girls chatting and laughing merrily. There were some gallant foreigners, and there were writing masters, and Roger could not tell them apart. There were mad boys from the squadron who rode at a furious canter, and there were groups of children, eager and flushed, excited and gay, with stolid grooms behind them. The path in several places ran close beside the main road of the park, and with the coming of the dusk this road took on deep purple hues and glistened with reflections from countless yellow motor eyes, and from the polished limousines sumptuous young women smiled out upon the riders. At least so Roger saw this life, and after those bleak, lonely years confronted by extremity, it was good to come here and forget, to feel himself for the moment a part of the thoughtless gaiety, the ease and luxury of the town. Here he was just on the edge of it all. Often, as a couple passed, he would wonder what they were doing that night. In the riding school where he kept his horse, it was a lazy pleasure to have the English valet there pull off his boots and breeches, though if anyone had told him so, Roger would have denied it with indignation and surprise, for was he not an American? It had been a wonderful tonic, a great idea of Laura's, this forcing him up here to ride. In one of her affectionate moods, just after a sick spell he had been through, his gay, capricious daughter had insisted that he have his horse brought down from the mountains. She had promised to ride with him herself, and she had done so for a week. Since then he had often met her here with one of her many smart young men. What a smile of greeting would flash on her face when Laura happened to notice him. He was thinking of Laura now, and there was an anxious gleam in his eyes, for young Sloane was coming to dinner tonight. What was he going to say to the fellow? Bruce had learned that Sloane played polo, owned and drove a racing car, and was well liked in his several clubs. But what about women and his past? Edith had urged her father to go through the lad's life with a fine-tooth comb, and if he should find anything there, to kick up no end of a row for the honor of his family. All of which was nothing but words, reflected Roger pettishly. It all came to this, that he had a most ticklish evening ahead. On the path, as a rider greeted him, his reply was a dismal frown. Laura's suitor arrived at 6 o'clock. In his study, Roger heard the bell, listened a moment with beating heart, then raised himself heavily from his chair and went into the hallway. "Ah, yes, it's you," he exclaimed with a nervous cordiality. "Come in, my boy, come right in. Here, let me help you with your coat. I don't know just where Laura is." He violently cleared his throat. "Suppose, while we're waiting, we have a smoke." He kept it up back into his den. There the suitor refused a cigar and carefully lit a cigarette. Roger noticed again how young the chap was, and marriage seemed so ridiculous. All this feverish trouble was for something so unreal. "Well, sir," the candidate blurted forth, "I guess I'd better come right to the point. Mr. Gale, I want to marry your daughter." "Laura?" "Yes." Roger cursed himself. Why had he asked Laura? Of course it was Laura. Would this cub be wanting Deborah? "Well, my boy," he said thickly, I wish I knew you better." "So do I, sir. Suppose we begin." The youth took a quick pull at his cigarette. He waited, stirred nervously in his seat. "You'll have some questions to ask, I suppose." "Yes, there are questions." Roger had risen mechanically and was slowly walking the room. He threw out short, gruff phrases. "I'm not interested in your past. I don't care about digging into a man. I never have and I never will, except as it might affect my daughter. That's the main question, I suppose. Can you make her happy?" I think so, said Sloane decidedly. Roger gave him a glance of displeasure. That's a large order, young man, he rejoined. Then let's take it in sections, the youngster replied. Confound his boyish assurance. To begin with, he was saying, I rather think I have money enough. We'd better go into that, hadn't we? Yes, said Roger indifferently. We might as well go into it. Of course the chap had money enough. He was a money maker. You could hear it in his voice. You could see it in his jaw, in his small, aggressive blonde mustache. Now he was telling briefly of his rich aunt in Bridgeport, of the generous start she had given him, his work downtown, his income. 22,000 this year, he said. We can live on that all right, I guess. You won't starve, was the dry response. Roger walked for a moment in silence, then turned abruptly on young Sloane. Look here, young man, I don't want to dig, he continued very huskily, but I know little or nothing of what may be behind you. I don't care to ask you about it now, unless it can make trouble. It can't make trouble. At this answer, low but sharp, Roger wheeled and shot a glance into those clear, twinkling eyes. His own eyes gleamed with pain. Laura had been such a little thing in the days when she had been his pet, the days when he had known her well. What could he do about it? This was only the usual thing, but he felt suddenly sick of life. How soon do you want to get married? He demanded harshly. Next month, if we can. Where are you going? Abroad, said Sloane. Roger caught at this topic as at a straw. Soon they were talking of the trip, and the tension slackened rapidly. He had never been abroad himself, but had always dreamed of going there. With maps and books of travel, Judith and he had planned it out. In imagination, they had lived in London and Paris, Munich and Rome, always in queer old lodgings looking on quaint, crooked streets. He had dreamed of long, delicious rambles, glimpses into queer old shops, vast, silent, dark cathedrals. For Laura, how different it would be. This boy of hers knew Europe as a group of gorgeous new hotels. The moment Laura joined them, her father's eye was caught and held by the ring upon her finger. Roger knew rings. They were his hobby, and this huge yellow solitaire in its new and brilliant setting at once awakened his dislike. It just fitted the life they were to lead. What life? As he listened to his daughter, he kept wondering if she were so sure. Had she felt no uneasiness? She must have, he decided, for all her gay excitement. One Laura in that smiling face, another Laura deep inside, doubting and uncertain, reaching for her happiness, now elated, now dismayed, exclaiming, Now at last I'm starting. Oh, what an ignorant child she was. He wanted to cry out to her, You'll always be just starting. You'll never be sure. You'll never be happy. You'll always be just beginning to be. And the happier you are, the more you will feel it is only a start. And then, more and more, his spirit withdrew from these two heedless children. Later on, when Deborah came, he barely noticed her meeting with Sloane. And through dinner, while they talked of plans for the wedding, the trip abroad, still Roger took no part at all. He felt dull and heavy. Deborah, too, he noticed, after her first efforts to be welcoming and friendly, had gradually grown silent. He saw her watching Laura with a mingled look of affection and of whimsical dismay. Soon after dinner she left them, and Roger smoked with the boy for a while and learned that he was 29. Both had grown uneasy and rather dull with each other. It was a relief when again Laura joined them dressed to go out. She and her lover left the house. Roger sat motionless for some time. His cigar grew cold, unheated. One of the sorrows of his life had been that his only son had died. Bruce had been almost like a son, but this young man of Laura's? No. Later he went for his evening walk, and as though drawn by invisible chains, he strayed far down into the ghetto. Soon he was elbowing his way through a maze of uproarious tenement streets as one who had been there many times. But he noticed little around him. He went on as he had always gone, seeing and hearing this seething life only as a background to his own adventure. He reached his destination. Pushing his way through a swarm of urchins playing in front of a pawn shop, he entered and was a long time inside, and when he came out again at last the whole expression of his face had undergone a striking change. As one who had found the solace he needed for a moment, his pace unconsciously quickened and he looked about him with brighter eyes. Around the corner from his home he went into a small jewelry shop, a remnant of the town of the past. There were no customers in the place, and the old Galatian jeweler sat at the back playing solitaire. At sight of Roger he arose, and presently, in the small back room, beneath the glare of a powerful lamp, the two were studying the ring which Roger had found in the ghetto that night. It was plain, just a thin, worn band of gold with an emerald by no means large, but the setting was old and curious, and personal, distinctive. Somebody over in Europe had worked on it long and lovingly. Now, as the Galicians gently rubbed and polished and turned the ring this way and that, the light revealed crude, tiny figures, a man and a woman under a tree, and was that a vine or a serpent? They studied it long and absorbedly. At home, up in his bedroom, Roger opened a safe which stood in one corner, took out a large shallow tray, and sat down with it by his lamp. A strange array of rings was there, small and delicate, huge, bizarre. Great signet rings and poison rings, love tokens, charms, and amulets, rings which had been worn by wives, by mistresses, by favorite slaves, and by young girls in convents. Rings with the Madonna, and rings with many other saints graven on large heavy stones. Rings French and Russian, Polish, Italian, Spanish, Syrian. Some were many centuries old. In 9 shallow metal trays they filled the safe in Roger's room. Although its money value was small, the Gale collection was well known to a scattered public of connoisseurs, and Roger took pride in showing it. But what had always appealed to him most was the romance, the mystery stored up in these old talismans that had lived so many ages, traveled through so many lands, decked so many fingers. Roger had found every one of them in the pawn shops of New York. What new recruits to America had brought them here and pawned them? From what old cities had they come? What passions of love and jealousy, of hatred, faith, devotion were in this glittering array? Roger's own love affair had been deep, but quiet, and even, and happy. All the wild adventures, the might have beens in his sex life, were gathered in these dusky trays, with their richly colored glints of light. Of his daughters, Laura had been the most interested in his rings, and so he thought of Laura now as he placed in the tray the new ring he had bought, the one he would have liked for her. But a vague uneasiness filled his mind, for he knew she had the same craving as he for what gleamed out of these somber trays. The old Galician jeweler had long been quite a friend of hers. She had often dropped in at his shop to ask him curious questions about his women patrons. And it was just this side of him that Roger did not care for. So many of those women were from a dubious, glittering world, and the old Galician took a weird, vicarious joy in many of the gay careers into which he sent his beloved rings, his brooches, earrings, necklaces, his clasps, and diamond garters. And Laura loved to make him talk. Yes, she was her father's child, a part of himself. He, too, had had his yearnings, his burning curiosities, his youthful ventures into the town. You will live on in our children's lives. With her inheritance, what would she do? Would she stop halfway as he had done, or would she throw all caution aside and let the flames within her rise? He heard a step in the doorway, and Deborah stood there smiling. "A new one?" she inquired. He nodded, and she bent over the tray. "Poor father," Deborah murmured. "I saw you eyeing Laura's engagement ring at dinner tonight. It wasn't like this one, was it?" He scowled. "I don't like what I see ahead of her, nor do you," he said. "Be honest." She looked at him perplexedly. "We can't stop it, can we? And even if we could," she said, "I'm not quite sure I'd want to. It's her love affair, not yours or mine, grown out of a life she made for herself, curious, eager, thrilled by it all, and in the center of her soul the deep, glad, growing certainty. I'm going to be a beautiful woman, I myself, I, Laura Gale. Oh, you don't know, nor do I." And so she felt her way along, eagerly, hungrily making mistakes, and you and I left her to do it alone. "I'm afraid we both rather neglected her, Dad," Deborah ended sadly. "And all we can do now, I think, is to give her the kind of wedding she wants." Roger started to speak, but hesitated. "What is it?" she inquired. "Queer," he answered gruffly, "how a man can neglect his children, as I have done, as I do still, when the one thing he wants most in life is to see each one of them happy."